Hello, I'm David Brewer, President of the Polk County Historical Association. Welcome to the debut of our first televised Polk Pioneer program. Like many organizations enduring the age of COVID-19, the Historical Association is adapting and finding new ways to connect, like this year's Polk Pioneer program. We acknowledge and appreciate the production assistance of Polk Government TV, PGTV, and thank you, our viewers, for tuning in. We look forward to the time when we can return to our usual format of offering the Polk Pioneer program in person at our annual luncheon and meeting, traditionally held on the third Thursday of June. Until then, we hope you enjoy this televised event to honor Polk Pioneers. Polk Pioneers is a collaboration between the Polk County Historical Association and the Polk County History Center. To qualify for selection as a Polk Pioneer, candidates must have been a resident of Polk County for at least 50 years, age 75 or older, complete an on-camera interview for public viewing in advance of the recognition at the Pioneer Luncheon. This year, we have 5 individuals who have met these qualifications and representing the communities of Bartow, Davenport, Lakeland, and Winter Haven. We will be sharing a small segment of their interviews with you shortly. Before we get to that, we know that you appreciate the traditions that are well established at our annual luncheon. So, we will honor those traditions on this program by having Lloyd Harris lead us in the song, God Bless America.
It's good to see everybody back this year at our Polk County Historical Association luncheon. It has been a tradition for many, many years that we always kick this luncheon off and all of our festivities with the singing of God Bless America. So let's all stand and we're going to sing and ask the Lord's blessing on this great nation. So please stand with me if you will and join me in song. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. From the mountains to the prairies to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home. Thank you. You may be seated.
Thank you, Lloyd. The 2020 Polk Pioneers will be presented in alphabetical order, beginning with Walter Covington Jr. Walter is 81 years old, grew up in the Pewsville community of Winter Haven. He is a lifelong Polk County resident.
What kind of parents were your parents?
My parents were real strict. Not only did my parents raise me, but the whole community, because that's the way we was brought up.
That's the Pewsville way, isn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
Mm-hmm.
And if you call a person a lie, you got to kill him.
Wow.
You got whooped 2 ways. Where you were at, you got a whooping. They carry you home and tell your parents what you did. You got a double whammy.
So there's a very strong code of discipline for the children of Pewsville.
You had to be disciplined. You had to say yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, sir, and no, sir, regardless of what color you were.
Right.
And my parents didn't play. And my father didn't have nothing but a 3rd grade education. But he could out-count me. He could do algebra.
No kidding.
Because when he came along, they had what you call a blue back speller.
Mm-hmm.
And they had everything in a blue back speller that he went through it. from front to back.
Let's talk about your childhood, the things you did for fun. I know you did a lot of chores and work at home, but what kind of things did you do for fun? I know you were involved in some activities at school. Tell us about that.
Well, when I was when I was going to school, I went to Oak Park Elementary first.
Is that in Pughsville?
I was in Pughsville.
Okay, Oak Park, okay.
Oak Park. We had Miss Librarian, Miss Long,
Oh,
and Miss Purcell. 3 teachers.
okay.
They taught us first, second, and third grade.
Oh my.
And when we moved to Florence-Villa, I was in 4th grade. Miss Somerville was our teacher. When I went to 5th grade, Miss Peterson was our teacher. And when I got promoted to 6th grade, Miss Librarian, who was principal over there in Oak Park, she was our 6th grade teacher.
Okay.
And she kept everything in perspective places because she was the principal there. When you were going to school at that time, that you couldn't play around.
Yeah, different, very different.
It was different. It was different. It was different back then. They cared about us, and they had a strong love for us. But we thought it was wrong. But we didn't get in no trouble.
And you now know that that was because they loved you.
They loved us.
Yeah. You finished school, and then you went in the military. So tell us about that. What branch of service, where were you, and what were you doing there?
I was in the, I went to school, I went to the Army in 1956,
Okay.
November the 24th. I was inducted into the Armed Forces in Jacksonville. As we being inducted, we going through the line with our shirts off, we get shot in both arms.
Ooh.
Oh, what these people doing? I enjoyed it. I had my basic training in Fort Benning in Georgia. I had my INT in Fort Sam Houston, Texas, in med school. And I loved it.
Yeah.
Because I was a medic. They taught me everything. I could give shots. I could read x-rays. The Army prepared me for a whole lot of things I was doing when I got out of service.
Well, that was just great. Went off, saw some of the world, had some fun, learned some skills, came back to Pughsville to be with your family, and then what did you do?
That's when I met my wife, Betty,
Where did you meet?
to the hospital where she was working.
She was already at the hospital working
Yes.
when you met. And what was the occasion of your being there? Were your parents in the hospital and
Nope.
you met her there? No, you just met her there.
I just know and I wanted to talk to her, so I went down and see her.
That's pretty romantic. That is very romantic. Now, and then so you all were married.
We married the 15th day of February 1958.
Lovely. Tell us a little bit about your marriage and the outcome of your marriage. I know you all were very, very fortunate to raise a pretty large family.
But we had good days. All my kids, I want them to run track.
I bet.
Boys play football, but all my girls could run.
All of the girls.
All of my girls could run.
Oh, that is so marvelous.
All my girls could
So
run.
they gave you a great deal of pleasure. I bet you went to a few track meets.
She could tell when I get there
Yeah. Because
because I was holler. You better not let her beat you.
you had pretty high expectations. That is just so great.
Her and Sherland and her and Cheryl Thomas. I went to all of them. I went to all these track meets.
Good for you.
Our second Polk Pioneer is S.L. Frisbee IV. S.L. is 79 years old and is a lifelong resident of Bartow. His grandparents established the Polk County Democrat newspaper publication.
Well, thank you. I began life in 1941 at Bartow Memorial Hospital. My family came here, my great-granddad came here in the late 1920s, and in 1931, my grandfather and my parents and I moved to Bartow. No, in 1931, there was no me. My grandfather and parents moved to Bartow, and granddad and great-granddad started the Polk County Democrat in 1931. Dad was in college at that time, Florida Southern College, as was Mother. That's where they met. And so the Polk County Democrat remained in the family for 75 years, which is, it's certainly not a record, but it's a little longer than the average newspaper ownership. As I say, I was born here in 1941, and despite the efforts of my parents to encourage me not to follow them into the newspaper business just because they were afraid that I thought that that was my obligation, the more they tried to get me to look at some other field, the more determined I was to go into the newspaper business. So when I went to Florida State University, I majored in government, which is one of the most important things, arguably the most important thing that newspapers cover. And then after 2 years in the Army, I came back and to Bartow in 1964, went to work at the newspaper. While I was in Tallahassee at Florida State University, I worked for 3 of my 4 years there. I worked at the Tallahassee Democrat a daily, and so I got my feet wet even before I came back to join the family business.
There was a period of time when you lived with your grandparents.
Yes.
Your dad was busy doing something.
Yes, Dad got a government job in 1944. He was drafted into the Army in 1944 at the age of 29.
Wow.
He was the last pre-Pearl Harbor father to be drafted. Being 29 years old, he was, and I can never remember whether he was the same age as his company commander and older than his battalion commander or vice versa. But at any rate, he was an old man, particularly by that far into the war. The draft was reaching down to younger and younger men. And so Dad, at the age of 29, was drafted into the war, fought at the Battle of the Bulge, had his feet frozen, as did numerous soldiers in that time and place. Spent the rest of the Army in Army hospitals with his feet recovering, and then became part of the Army of Occupation.
Wow. I like another story from your childhood, when kind of going back to the business, and you all had a particular interest in reporting government, and you accompanied your mother to the courthouse.
Yes, and I don't remember whether this was during the war or she went back home, as did so many wives who came out of housewife chores and
Right.
went to work.
Oh, yeah.
She came back to work, and it was either during the war or very shortly after the war, when I was not yet in school, and I used to accompany her on her news rounds. And that news rounds were made to the Polk County Courthouse, and at that time that was the entire offices of county government.
Correct.
The county commission and all of its offices were there. The county school board headquarters was there. The clerk of the courts, obviously, and the courtrooms, of which there were 2 at that time, and all the miscellaneous, property appraiser, tax assessor, tax collector, even I think the county engineer or county surveyor or some such was there. But all of county government was in that one building, which today, of course, is the Polk County History Center.
Correct. I wonder, as a young boy, did it seem just like a massive building to you? Do you have any memories of just going in there and thoughts of what this felt like?
No, I can't really say that I do. I used to go up on, probably a very few years later than that, I would go up with Dad in the evenings when when he was waiting for a jury to come in a criminal trial.
Oh, wow.
And so I had an exposure to it. I seldom, if ever, actually attended the trials, although I do remember I was there one time when a jury was being chosen in a bootlegging case. And they had the prospective jurors there, the venire, and the judge or clerk, whoever was calling so many of the venire men, I think I've got the term relatively close, to be interviewed, and they call out one name, and one of the defendants raised his hand and says, "That's me." And so the the prosecutor with a straight face then said, "Your Honor, we moved to strike so-and-so for cause," and their defense attorney, with an equally straight face, says, "Is this going to count as one of his peremptory challenges?" So it was
Great memories.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you have those memories. Well, you managed to get through that, and then you head off to Tallahassee.
right. Went to Florida State University for 4 years. And, as I say, worked at the Tallahassee Democrat for 3 of the 4 years. My freshman year, I worked as a student assistant at 75 cents an hour in the FSU News Bureau. And I have confessed that it's the only job where I did not earn the money that they paid me. It was sort of a nothing job, and I did next to nothing. And then at the end of my freshman year, I got a job at the Tallahassee Democrat as an entry-level reporter. And that job paid $1 an hour because the newspaper came under the federal wage hour law, which the college didn't. So I have observed since then that I'm one of the few people who ever left a government job for a newspaper job because it paid more money. So I've stayed there and learned a great deal at the Tallahassee Democrat. We had a very small staff, given that it was the Florida State Capitol newspaper. And as a result of that, I had a chance to work most of the news beats there.
That is great. That is just great. You know, we talked about the fact that your parents wondered if that's the career that you should go in, but I realized as we're talking, that's in your DNA.
It is for a fact.
It's just your DNA. That's just who you are.
And I didn't realize at the time that they were trying so hard to talk me into considering other fields for the sole reason that they didn't want me to feel like it was an expectation, and which, as far as I can remember, I never felt that way. And they later told me they were delighted when I said no, I was going to be a newspaper man.
Next up, Ora H. Greene. Ora is a retired Polk County educator and community activist who has lived in Winter Haven for 54 years.
I grew up in Gainesville, Florida, which is Alachua County, a very industrious area. Because as you're aware, the University of Florida is there, which means the whole environment is affected one way or another by the university there. At our school, we had a K through 12. It was Lincoln Elementary, Junior High, Senior High School. So once you enrolled at the elementary level, you were there. I can't help but to think about the gracious teachers we had during that time. They were really caring, very caring. And you were almost like you were away from home when you were with them. You felt that. Your teachers knew you, you saw your teachers. They were in your churches, in your community, in your stores. So they were in constant contact with your parents. So that was a very good plus. The comfortableness there, the closeness in securing an education, the coordination between the parents and the school. I was in Gainesville until I had my first teaching assignment. And my youngest brother was there. And we were so close. He always wanted to do whatever I did. So he was in teaching also. And he came to Sebring, where I had my first teaching position.
You know, I want to go backwards just a little bit to your college days. We've certainly celebrated Mary Bethune-Cookman a lot this year, and she was very involved in the suffrage movement. I wonder if you have any memories of her involvement or discussing her.
I remember when I first went to Bethune-Cookman. She was alive, I think, first 2 years. Very gracious woman, stately. Her home was on the other end of the campus. We would see her. She was just a precious person. We had the Bethune-Cookman Gospel Choir to our church this year. And they asked me to give the welcome. And I told them the story. They were overwhelmed. They said, we've never heard a welcome like that where you included some of the history of Bethune-Cookman. I said, well, it was always there. And that's the way she was. Pleasure.
So you've graduated from college and you're teaching. Somewhere along the way, you have met Mr. Anthony Greene. Tell us about that. How did that come about?
Well, we knew Anthony at a distance from the school in Sebring, because that was my first teaching assignment, was in Highlands County. And I was living at the time with my brother. My brother and I had really started buying this home. And later on, even after he married, and we had my mother there, I lived there. I still continued to live there. So his wife, his name was Gracie at the time, she was going to summer school at A&M. Well, I never cared that much for A&M. I love Cookman. But I said, she asked me, she said, why won't you go with me this year? I said, well, you know how I feel about A&M. She said, but yeah, just come on and go with me, Ora. And so I did. So my sister-in-law then got busy. She'd invite him for dinner. So one night she invited him for dinner. Well, in the dining room, there was a living room and a dining room. They had an old couch on the floor in the dining room. Well, in as much as he was her company, I would sit on the floor and let them study together. Well, he was there this time, and the voice said, I heard this voice say, that would make you a good husband. I didn't tell nobody because we knew he had a girlfriend, because he had told us, you know, that some of his girlfriend was from Georgia. And so I didn't say a thing to nobody. So here again, later on, she invited him again. The same voice spoke to me.
Lovely.
So that night, I told her, she said, girl, that's the Lord. I said, what? She said, that's the Lord. I said, neither one of us are thinking about marriage. Neither one. She said, but that's what it is. And she got busy and played Cupid, and the rest is history. From that time on, but believe it or not, after Anthony and I, we talked, we explored in many avenues. We talked at length. And I guess I really met him in July. August, we had decided to get married.
Lovely.
So when I went home, my family said, get married. We were engaged. We got engaged on my birthday, which was September 9th. And then the 26th, we got married on September. They say, you don't know him? Yes, we do. And we were married, what, 53 glorious years.
Beautiful.
Yes.
I had the opportunity to read your interview. You had so many commitments that you made to the betterment of your community. Mm-hmm. A lot of involvement in church, a lot of involvement in organizations. One that I'd like to talk with you about is the National Coalition of 100 Black Women.
We would have friends and family over for the 4th of July also. Mm-hmm. So she talked to us for years about this organization that she had heard about, the National Coalition of 100 Black Women. She had gone to her family reunion in Tennessee, where she first heard, and so her name was Alfreda Cunningham. And so Alfreda called a group of women in, this is the history, and went to Haven, did a poll to see how many people were interested in such an organization. We were fortunate, after many hours, the group approved. We had a dynamic group of women who were interested in forming. And so that's how we came about. Alfreda was the founding president of this organization and did a wonderful job.
Our fourth pioneer is Edgar T Picket Jr. Edgar is 92 years old and was among the first African American officers hired by the City of Lakeland Police Department. During his career, he received statewide recognition as a forensic fingerprint expert.
We were talking off camera too about baseball. As a kid, you said you weren't able to get in to see the Tigers play?
No, they finally let us in, and they put the bleachers on the west side of the stadium, and it was hard to get a chance to see them because we couldn't mingle with them. And on Florida Avenue, they had two-story buildings, and they had porches up, and the people would charge us a quarter, and we would go upstairs and look at the play. And I used to always go to see Hank Greenberg knock the ball out the stadium, and they just didn't want us to meet with them. And then finally, we got a chance to go in.
So following, well, what year did you graduate from high school?
In 1946. June of 46.
Oh, so you were in high school during the war years.
Yes, and just about all of my classmates went into the service but me. I don't know why they didn't call, 'cause I stayed in the A class, but my rating was 1A on my registration card on my card, but they never did call me. So I tried to go into the Coast Guard, but they never answered me till after the war. Then they said that they didn't need anybody else, but then I found out that no minorities could be in the Coast Guard, and that's the reason why they never would answer me. I wanted to go to college, but I couldn't afford it. My parents didn't have the money, and my daddy was bought a house and was building the correction. He didn't buy it. He was building the house and paying for it as he go. And I had a job at Montgomery Ward, and I was making $25.50 per week. And I had married my wife in 1950, January 1950. And my daddy wanted me to get a home, so we moved in with him. My wife was making $13.50 a week. So we gave my daddy $5 a week to stay there and eat. And my wife and I would give the rest of the money to the church and go to the movies. Then I would take my $25.50 per week and put in a house. And I bought a lot from my sister. I received $200 and some from my income tax, and I gave it to my sister for a lot on Whitehurst Street. And every week I'd take that $25 and put in the house. And we built that house, and I had never built a house in my life. And I drew out some plan on a piece of paper. I bought my permit for $5. We had a lamp light, a handsaw, a hammer, a square, and a lever. And when I get off from work, we would build a house. And during those days, when they sent in furniture at Montgomery Ward, it would come in wooden crates. I'd get the wood, pull the nails out of it, tie it on my bicycle, and ride it home. And I used that for my subflow. And it took us about a year, but as soon as we got one room completed in the bath, we moved in. And just every week, just buy lumber, and that's the way we built the house. And at the corner of Pine in Florida, I saw a lot of whites and a policeman. And I was happy because I saw that policeman. And he yelled at me and used some words that I didn't like, but I couldn't. I had fear. And I came home and told my parents that I wanted to be a policeman to prove that you didn't have to be that type of person to be a policeman. And my mother said, you would never be one in Lincoln because they're not going to have it. And she worked for the mayor. And she went back and told him. And he said, well, have him to come to the city commissioner meeting my daddy. And my father went down there. And that's how we got started. And Mr. Flanagan said, the only thing you have to do is pass the test and you would be hired. But my parents still didn't want me to be a policeman, but they opened it up for the other one. So I never did tell them. I took the test and passed and was hired before I let them know that I was going to be a police officer. And I went down to Delray Beach, and I met some black officers. And I told them I was studying fingerprints. And they said, well, we don't know anything about that, but we have a sergeant here. His name was Frisbee IV. And so they introduced me to him. And he was taking the same course I was taking. And he said, man, he says, I want you to come to our convention. Said, we're having one up in Winter Garden. I said, you know I can't go there. They had just signed the paper for integration. I said, you know I can't go to that hotel. He said, how do you put your pants on? I said, one leg at a time. time? He said, good, that's the way I put mine on. Be my guest. And I had fear because I had never stayed in a motel in my life, had never been in one. And on my way up there, I just kept praying,
Do you miss working there?
Yes, but I wouldn't want to be a police officer now. I would like to be in the crime scene division because I worked many cases, and just to see how I always used, when I was a little boy, I used to work with puzzles, putting things together. And that's the way I put my crime scene as a puzzle and put it together. And when I see certain things on TV and they're not going right, that kind of upsets me because you can't do that. And people think it can be done, but that's not the way it works.
Our final inductee is Harriet Ruiz Rust. Harriet is 79 years old and grew up in Davenport area in a cattle, citrus, and beekeeping family who settled there in the late 1800s and early 1900s.
My great uncle came to Horse Creek. Now, Horse Creek is about 1.5 miles north of Davenport.
Okay.
He came and he actually had a land grant for 1883, but he only moved here in 1885. And his sister was my great-great-grandmother. And so she arrived in about 1897. So now those are my maternal great-great-grandparents.
Okay.
My great-grandparents, whom I came to Osceola County, and then that's where my grandmother was born. Then my grandmother and this is my paternal grandparents, and they were married in 1910 in Osceola County and moved to Davenport out on Lake St. Charles. And my grandfather built the house that I grew up in 1921. So next year it will be 100 years old. And so I'm very excited about that. And my sister and I grew up there. They actually moved the house to town so that my sister and I could go to school because there were no school buses or anything out. And if you know, Lake St. Charles is out near the Heart of Florida Regional Hospital on 27. And so that was kind of how we arrived here. Now, my maternal grandparents came in 1900. So this is my my grandmother and my grandfather, my great-grandmother, my grandfather, that were my grandmother's parents. And my grandmother lived with us, so I enjoyed having a life with her. And I knew 3 of my 4 grandparents, and that's probably unusual.
Well, let's talk about your parents.
Oh,
Now, your
okay.
parents, we've talked about your great-grandparents, your grandfather and grandmother, and now your parents. Oh my goodness, look at this sweet picture. Tell us who we're looking at here.
Well, the one on the left is my Uncle Vance, and he was the cabinet maker. He grew up to be a cabinet maker, and he also made boats for some of the local fishing sites around Polk County. That's my dad in the middle, and my dad actually worked for the post office in his later years, but early on he worked in this citrus industry, and he had bees and cattle and spent a lot of his time until his late years. Actually, his cattle and the groves were on that same property. So, and that's, the other one was my aunt. This is my mom and dad, and my dad was Grady Lewis Rewis, and my mother was Matilda Frazier. And she thought that her name was Frazier, but her father came from Ireland and changed his name on the way from Philadelphia to Florida. His name was really Ambrose Fagan, but she did not know that until after he passed away.
How interesting. That
and
is so
she worked in the citrus industry and alongside my dad with all those, you know, with the bees and the cattle and the farming. And she also was like a president of the PTA, and she was a treasurer for this church, and then she had plenty of time to spend her extra time, of course. She sewed all the clothes for my sister and I as we were growing up.
Oh, how lovely.
I don't know when she slept. I have no idea when she slept.
See, in 1962, You and Peter Allen Rust were married. Y'all were married for 55 years until his death in 2018. Tell us more about meeting Pete and how you all got together.
Well, actually, we really knew we really got together more at church because we sang in the choir. We were in the same Sunday school class. And quite frankly, I couldn't stand him. So I'm sorry to say, but he played football and he was very pompous and had an ego, I guess.
Oh my.
So anyway, and then until he, then he went to the University of Florida. I went to FSU for a little while, and so we, just didn't cross paths that much until later on. And then it was, most interesting. He joined the Marine Corps, and then of course, he was much more interesting, so I guess. So anyway, then we were married while he was in the Marine Corps, and we traveled 4.5 years. He was in school most of the time, so we left on our honeymoon to San Diego, California, because that's where he had been transferred to.
Oh, nice, yeah.
And then we lived in St. Simon's Island, Georgia, because he was at the Glencoe Air Station, which he actually was in the air wing of the Marine Corps, not in the traditional Marine Corps. And then our son John was born while we were there. And then we moved to Beaufort, South Carolina, where the air wing there. And we really missed Beaufort's comeback, I guess. It was still not so historically restored as it is today. It's a lovely, lovely place today. And then we were there for about 2.5 years. Michael was born while we were there. Yes. And then we came home, and he worked for General Telephone, actually. In fact, he worked with the portion of he actually had the red telephone that called the president on his desk. So that was north of Polk City, and that was all underground, and they could stay for weeks on end. They didn't, of course, but, and then our daughter Sarah was born while we lived, while he was working there, and then he became a manager of General Telephone in Winter Haven. And so, it was an interesting life. Got to do a lot of interesting things.
Life.
Yeah. This is a picture of Pete as he was leaving being the president of the the Ridge League of Cities, and he was mayor of Davenport for 16 years. And so this was one of the final luncheons that we were at.
This 2020 class of Polk Pioneers is an entertaining and diverse group who have lived through some remarkable history. Congratulations and thank you, Polk Pioneers, for sharing your story and preserving local history. To close our program, we again return to tradition. Lloyd Harris will offer happy trails to you. And don't be shy about joining in from the comfort of your living rooms. We will even provide the words. Until we meet again.
This has been a wonderful, wonderful day. We would like to thank you all for having attended our Polk County Historical Association Salute to Our Pioneers. And as a tradition, as we start off with God Bless America, Lois Scharouse, I believe it was, who introduced this as a closing tradition to our luncheons. And it's one that we wish everyone great fortune and great happiness until we meet again. And of course, if you grew up like I did, you grew up loving Roy Rogers and Dale Evans. And so we're going to sing their song, Happy Trails, till we meet again. So stand if you will. And in closing our program today, we salute you and our pioneers with this song. Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling until then. Who cares about the clouds when we're together? Just sing a song and bring the sunny weather. Happy trails to you till we meet again. Happy trails, and God bless you, and we'll see you again next year.